Well, hello and welcome everyone to another fantastic episode of RfRx. My name is Eric Wells and I'm the support group director for Recovering from Religion. And with me co-hosting today is Rob Palmer, and he is a Helpline agent and ambassador. Glad to see you, sir.
Hey all, I hope this is going to be an interesting evening. In fact, I'm sure, having read the description.
Yeah, I think so, dude. This is going to be a tough one, and we'll give some trigger warnings a little bit later on, but it's going to be a good one. We do kind of need to know about this and how to support people who are around us. But with before we get into that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to let you know that this right here, right now, is episode number 100 of RfRx. You are looking at one with 2 zeros behind it, RfRx, 100 episodes. I never thought I'd make it this long, or we would make it this long.
Absolutely amazing.
I know.
We should have had a Maya here just for this to celebrate, and she led us off.
I can get here next week. Next week is going to be our 2-year anniversary.
Wow.
Yeah. I thought that RfRx was going to be like a summer fling, like we would just run out of topics real quick, but 2 years on, we still have plenty more to talk about. All right, folks, at the beginning of every RfRx, we have a poll, and today is no different. On today's poll, we have 4 questions, each one with the answer of yes, no, or I'm not sure. So the first question is, should people be protected from conversion therapy? Yes, no, or I am not sure. Question number 2, do you think that governments should intervene to end conversion therapy in principle? Yes, no, or I'm not sure. Question number 3, since conversion therapy is so prevalent in faith settings, do you feel its practice is a protected religious right? And question number 4, because of the secrecy and shame surrounding conversion therapy, should it be discussed publicly? All right, so those questions will be going and the poll will be running as we are doing a little intro, and we'll wrap it up once we start to introduce our amazing guest. Okay, so we are here at RfRx. You want to tell us what that is, Mr. Rob?
Yes, you've used that term a few times. What is RfRx? Well, that's what we call our weekly meetings, where we host guests who discuss topics relevant to folks in this community. It is not a replacement for the online community or the support groups, which Eric will tell you about in a moment. These talks and presentations aim to provide good information, advice, coping skills to our clients and the community. Pertinent questions, comments, inquiries can be sent via email to, I think that's going to be posted, right? RfRx at recoveringfromreligion.org.
Folks, RFR, we have been using the initialism RFR for a little bit. You may be wondering, if you're new, what RFR stands for. That stands for Recovering from Religion. And we are a nonprofit organization. We have all sorts of amazing programs that are centered around our mission of offering hope, healing, and support to those who are struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. And so with that in mind, like I had said, we have several programs kind of tailored to pursue that mission. Why don't you start us off with the healing aspect of our mission? What programs do we have there, Rob?
Yeah, so that's covered by our 24/7 helpline. We offer support via either phone calls or online chats. And there are certain specific numbers you can call from some English-speaking countries, but you can also make a web call from anywhere on the planet. You can even schedule a call at a convenient time by using our website. Volunteers like me offer empathetic support without judgment or criticism. And we will listen and we suggest resources, which are also directly available there via our newly redesigned resource page. It's got a fantastic search engine in it. So the next part is hope. Tell us about that, Eric.
You bet. Hope. You know, part of what we really can use in these dark times as we're having our doubts or we're transitioning out of religion is some hope, a light at the end of the tunnel. Like, yeah, I can make it through this troubling time in my life. And we do that here at RFR in the sharing and telling of stories. And more often than not, a story that you might relate to, and you can see how they got out of this and how they worked their way out of it. That will provide some hope for us in the future where, oh, okay, I just have to hold on a little bit longer, or I can consider these things that may happen, and I'll be able to get through this. So we have got a blog, a fantastic blog over on medium.com called Excommunications. And we also have our blog, or our, yeah, let's talk about the blog. We also have our podcast, and the podcast right now is all of the RfRx shows that we've got, but way in the back, before we started up RfRx, there are a lot of folks who were brought on to share their stories as well. So check both of those out. And that's again how we work with our hope part of the mission.
And I was going to handle support, but I just couldn't do that because I know you like to talk about it so much. Tell us about support, Eric.
Oh my gosh, with pleasure. Folks, the support group program. I love the support group program. These are where we get to have face-to-face meetings, whether it's in person or it's virtually over Zoom, to kind of share and discuss and talk about what we've been going through. We also have the opportunity to listen about what others have gone through, what others are struggling with right now that stem back to how religion had hurt them. So right now we have well over 60 groups around the world, and you can find the nearest one to you at our website, and I'll drop a link to that in the chat. Okay. Secular Therapy Project, you want to talk about that, Mr. Rob?
Yeah, so if you need more than a peer-to-peer group or talking to us or chatting us on the phone, we have a project called the Secular Therapy Project. Even though Matt Dillahunty calls it the Secular Therapist Project, it's not. It's the Secular Therapy Project. And it allows clients to connect with a licensed secular mental health care provider, right? They're carefully screened for a bunch of criteria. One, of course, is they have to be appropriately licensed in their state or country. They have to maintain a secular practice, no use of religion, no proselytizing in their therapy, and they exclusively use evidence-based treatments. And you want to talk about the online community, Eric?
You bet I do. Folks, there was another piece that was kind of needed and wanted, that was asked for as we were moving around our developing our programs around our mission. And one of them was kind of a community aspect where folks who have been through similar situation can connect with one another, chat and understand and talk with one another. And so we have set up the RFR online community. Now, this isn't something that's publicly available. You can't search on the internet and find it. You have to go through the helpline, whether it's chatting in or having a phone call to kind of, in order to get an invite. They'll ask you a few questions, see if you're a good fit, and then send you an invite. We have in the online community, there are Sunday Zoom meetings where we all kind of get to hang out and meet with one another. And then, if you are finding yourself as a brand new secular parent, like, okay, how do I raise a kid secular in a secular manner? The whole plan was to raise them more religious. I'm no longer religious. Where do I go from now? There's a channel in Slack for that. I'm a member of the LGBTQ community. How do I work with my feelings and who I care about, but still have to deal with this old religious outlook on it? So there is a LGBTQ community channel in Slack as well. So many different channels, ex-Muslim, ex-Jehovah's Witness. So if that sounds like something that's right for you, head on over to the helpline, call and chat in, and they'll send you an invitation if you seem like a good fit. In addition to that, if you are looking for a bigger community, the folks who are out and proud, or not necessarily out and proud, but kind of like secular and just like hanging out and having some good discussions, I'd recommend taking a look at the Atheist Community of Discord. Right now, that group is streaming this program into their Discord channel. So the Atheist Community Discord, fantastic group. And you'll see a lot of RFR folks over there as well, kind of hanging out, because it's a really cool place to be. Volunteering, Rob, you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So healing can come from helping others as well as you being helped directly, right? RFR volunteers find meaning and purpose by volunteering with us and helping other people. And we're always in need of volunteers. So all sorts of jobs besides working the helplines, which is the most obvious one people hear about. Finding, vetting, posting good resources for our clients and us to use, supporting the online community that Eric just talked about. We need people to support our IT upgrades, and even the kind of thing I'm doing right now, helping with our Zoom sessions.
Absolutely. So folks, definitely, and I've gotten way more out of volunteering than I've ever put into it. It's just something that I feel a lot of passion for and get a lot of satisfaction out of as well. I want to let you know that this discussion is, it may be triggering for some folks. We're going to be talking a little bit about abuse, and we're also going to be using some religious and evangelical terminology. So Please be aware of that if you start to get some triggering feelings boiling up for you, bubbling up for you, please go ahead and put this on mute or handle it how you feel like you need to do it best. This will be up on YouTube, and you can catch up with whatever you missed in that meantime. All right. Well, without further ado, Rob, would you like to introduce our guest?
Certainly. So Dr. Mark Eastwood is an executive and non-executive boardroom professional with extensive global governance experience, working for companies such as American Express and Rackspace Technology. He's a doctorate in global management and wrote How to Care for Our People. And Mark is a survivor himself of conversion therapy. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, and it's great to be here. I am a little worried that this is show number 100, so I'm really going to try to make sure I don't fuck it up.
It's not like it's number 13 or something.
Yeah.
Mark, I'm so glad you're here with us today. We have had a discussion about conversion therapy in the past, but it's always really, really good to hear it from another's point of view, and especially from the sound of your voice. You're not necessarily from where I'm from in the United States. You're on the other side of the pond, right?
I am, yes. So I am greetings from just outside of Cambridge in the UK. It is after, well, yes, it is after midnight. So, but it's great to be with you. It's great to be with you, and it's such a privilege.
So, Mark, let's kind of hop right into this. Would you feel comfortable telling us about your story, like where you came from and how you found yourself in conversion therapy and how you kind of got out of it?
So I think just to start with,
sure.
As a gay person, I have no choice about being gay. I'm born gay, but I also come from a long line of homosexuals and famous homosexuals. My great-grandfathers that were gay include William II, Edward II, Richard I, Richard II of England. And so I didn't have a chance. I didn't have a choice. I didn't also have a chance. These were all my mother's family, and as it turned out, she was gay as well. So I didn't stand a chance for being, and hopefully I'm going to become another famous homosexual in my family too. So as a child, I didn't grow up in a religious home until I was about 5 years old, when my mother had an affair with another woman, which in the early 1970s was scandalous. And at the time, although I'm born in the UK and I am very British, I happened to be relocated to South Africa. And South Africa is an incredibly patriarchal society, misogynistic, and has a lot in common with Australia, parts of the US, New Zealand, that sort of English-speaking countries where religion played a large part of the development of those countries and how they became who they became. And in the early 1970s, Billy Graham was the next great thing, and everybody was trying to be part of that whole movement, very evangelical, fundamentalistic, religious movement. But initially, I wasn't brought up in that way at all. My mother, as I said, my mother had this relationship which was discovered, and she decided to go on a pilgrimage to shed herself of her gay side and stay married. And she had a child, and so we then started to go around a few little bits of churches until we settled quite quickly on the Assemblies of God. And actually in that sort of really early 1970s, especially something like the Assemblies of God, were very, very much about end times. I was going to say, even then, the Russians were going to get you. Of course, we live in a whole world right now at the moment where that's exactly what we start to think about it, right? Kind of come full circle. But back then, within the church, we were taught about the end times and the rapture, and we're going to be left behind. And so to give my life to God was so important. And there I am, probably about 5.5, 6 years old, and I'm told how to become a Christian, and that I had to do that because otherwise I was going to be left behind. And my parents were crying because I said, Jesus, come into my heart. I had no clue what I was doing, but my life changed because from then onwards, I was brought up in a home where the Bible was read every day, multiple times. The theology was starting to be built around me. And it was just at that moment when I was entering education. And so the inquiring mind was being taught things that I'm ashamed of the fact that even as a child, that I believed things that later on I have looked back and gone, sorry, how many animals went into that little boat?
2 of each kind?
2 of each kind. Where did the kangaroos come from? But I was just taught all this nonsense, and I believed all of it, and especially what I believed, and I feel now that I was a very gullible child, was that I needed to have the love of God.
Yeah.
And so anything that prevented me from having the love of God was then, I needed to make sure that I wasn't part of that, and I didn't do those things that prevented me from having the love of God. And
it sounds like then you were kind of feeling, even at a very young age, that you might have been different than some of your classmates or friends.
yes.
That's kind of what I'm hearing as undertone there.
Yeah, I mean, I felt different to other little boys from I suppose from an early age. I was about 6 years old, and my favorite aunt got married, and the family were gathering before the wedding, and I said to everybody, oh, when I am older, I'm also going to marry a man. That meant nothing to me, but it meant everything to my parents, who a week later put me into football, into soccer, and made me do things, help my father mend the car, and do all these things that a man does, because I had to be made into a man really, really quickly. I remember I must have been about 10 years old, and suddenly my hands started to hang upward for some reason. And my mother used to walk up to me and gently move it so that I didn't even sit in a way that could be, in any way, could be perceived as anything other than straight. And so there was a straightification of Mark happened. And I think it was out of my mother's fear that she probably saw, oh dear, my child is like me, and is same-sex attracted, and therefore she had to go out of her way to mend that and make sure that I didn't fall into the sinfulness that she had.
And she thought at this time, from the sounds of it, that it was correctable. Like if you did certain things, you would no longer be gay, as opposed to you're just born this way. And
including putting you in this position where you have to play sports with men and probably shower with them in the locker room.
Exactly.
Just saying.
I mean, just saying, yes. Yes. I think I must have been a little bit younger than maybe 5.5 or something. And I do have it as a memory, is that we went somewhere together as my mother and I needed to use the facilities. And in those days, nobody thought about your child going, and even as young as that, going in yourself. And I must have gone in there and been there an awful long time. But I think it was because I was fascinated by the urinal, and even at that age. But I remember being escorted out, my mother getting really angry with me, and I'd had no idea why she was angry with me. But I suppose she saw a penis like her far too early for her liking, and that had to be changed, and it had to be dealt with. And so really, I must have been about 10 years old onward really started to put through Pray the Gay Away theology. And that was starting.
How old were you?
I might have been 10 already when
Wow.
when there were things. And I certainly was told about the fact of this is sinful, and always gays came in. Homosexuals always came into the list. And I think it was obviously always intended to, but I didn't want to just only talk about that. So I had to be given a list of things and reminded. I mean, that could go on every day. At the same time, you know, all the stuff at Sunday school that's been taught to me, and I believe that it's true and real. So in a strange way, I feel like the history of the world is Genesis, and I believe those stories, not for being stories, but actually being reality. And so I was not only then started to be bullied at school because I'm gay, which I didn't understand what that meant, but then I was started to be bullied at school because I was also religious. So I was kind of double bullied. And so the very thing that actually I think my parents were desperately trying to do was probably driving me a little more underground. But it certainly it didn't have the desired effect, I think, that they thought. And then I was 16, and I had actually, the boy kissed me. I didn't even, because I was so naive and also incredibly shy as a child. So I would never have made the first move, but he did. And his mother got annoyed and told my mother. And so they thought, well, maybe the prayer way needed a little bit of assistance. And so the assistance then became the use of, pardon me, and the use of medical conversion, which is normally electric shock treatment.
Oh my gosh!
Because I was still at school, they decided to use to put the electrodes into my mouth, and I forgot about that completely. How they did it, I obviously erased it from my memory until about 2 years ago. I suddenly thought, there must be a reason why I really do not like going to the dentist. And yeah, I suddenly remembered, hold on a minute. Yeah, that's why I don't like the dentist. It's to do with coming too close and probing, I suppose, into my mouth. So it was certainly my first experience of pornography, not the kind that I eventually got to enjoy later on in my life. But yeah, it was the wrong kind of pornography, but that was the first time. And it was very embarrassing. So it was, yeah, you are with a person who you don't know, putting things in your mouth that, yeah. And then when you see images, those things either hurt you or they don't hurt you. And
this sounds a lot like Clockwork Orange type of stuff. Were you shown images and then shocked, kind of get like a negative response to these or negative, I don't know, imprint about these certain images?
I think that was the intention, is that eventually they can retrain your mind to find what is attractive and what is not attractive. Of course, when it's inbred in us, it's never going to work. But you know, I think it's still a practice that's used to this day. It's not something that just belongs 200 years ago with Charles Dickens. It actually is something that is even used to this day around the world. And so it was. However, what I did learn really quickly is that if I smiled at the right picture, then there was no pain.
Oh.
Aha. And so really, I think when I was about 16, I learned that to tell lies got you something. And so it's something that actually lying was, I think that it was entrenched. That changed my brain at 16 to know how to get away with things. And so the shock treatment didn't last very long. I think it was about a 6-month period in a mental institution. And it was terrifying to go there because the people in there were shouting and carrying on. And you could hear this because as you wandered off to the cell that they were using for your treatment, you could hear the inmates of this horrible horrible mental institute. So it was terribly frightening. So as I say, I learned very quickly how to eventually get out of it, and pretend that I was now, I suppose, straight.
So were you admitted to this hospital for the treatment and you stayed there, or was it something you would visit only for your treatments?
It was only for my treatments, which is why they
Okay.
used my mouth, because the electrodes could leave burn marks. So when you go back to school, somebody may see a burn mark. Well, you don't in the inside of your mouth. So it's a place that obviously also has sensitive
Oh my
skin.
gosh.
But it was that was really done on purpose so that I wouldn't have any, there wouldn't be anything external for other people to notice.
This
While I was in the
sounds
shower with all the other boys, nobody would notice burn marks on my chest or my back or something.
this sounds so much to me like the similar thinking an abuser would have to his wife or partner or something like that, like hurt them and so they don't walk away with any marks. That's really fucked up.
Oh, completely. I mean, I think that my parents thought they were doing the right thing for me. It took me a long time, though, to really understand how somebody who was suffering with the same dilemma could have inflicted such pain on their child. I mean, that and a mother. And I did wonder a long time. I had a strange relationship with her for many years, even from then onward. And unfortunately, she died when she was 49, which I'll come back to later on, because there is a significance to when she died and to me eventually finding myself.
Now, before all of, you had mentioned that before all of this treatment, you had there was the beginning of the Pray the Gay Away. Do you,
Yes.
Do you personally feel that is part of the conversion therapy, in some sense, just in a maybe not as upfront type of way, or painful as type of way?
No, yeah, absolutely. And actually, it was very upfront. So I would be beaten on the head with the Bible. When they say, so if I
it was
can
more
be
than it was more than just praying. It was actually physical abuse too.
Yeah, no, exactly. It was casting out the demon of homosexuality. So I'd have to be beaten in the name of Jesus, get out, and then beaten on the head.
Wait, are you saying that metaphorically, or did they actually? Did they think they were performing an exorcism?
Yeah, they performed it. They tried to perform an exorcism
at the age of 10.
At the age of 10.
Wow.
I do remember being beaten on the back of my neck with the Bible, and I remember it being on its side, which I mean is devastatingly cruel, really, to a child, and being hit on the head and on the back and on the shoulders, because the Word of God, I don't know how it gets in you, but anyway, that's a whole nother matter. So a lot of cruelty used, and I know that there are other people who had very, very similar experiences. And then after this, there was a feeling for a little while after I was 16 that I was healed, and I showed no signs of being with anybody. Well, it couldn't be further from the truth, right? Because that was not what was going on then in Mark's life, because he was trying I was trying hard, because the thing is that when you've been brought up to believe that you need to have the love of God, and that is something that you almost crave. I mean, to me, it actually showed if anybody was looking in and had been interested, what they would have actually said is that child is being abused, but also that child has some mental health issues. Now, that's what I would see now in somebody if I met them and they displayed some of the tendencies to be incredibly withdrawn. Oddly though, I never attempted suicide in any way, but I think had I had the inclination to, I probably would have, because my life, it was very cruel. So I'm now living in this sort of, I'm frightened at home, But I'm also frightened at school where I'm being bullied for being gay. And then when I get home, I'm frightened because I didn't say anything. So I can't even say to my parents, I'm being bullied at school, because they'd say why. And if I'd say because they think I'm gay, then I know that they were going to up the ante on, increase the level of their support to make me straight.
Right.
So
Then they might say, well, what were you doing that made them think that?
Exactly that. Well, you must be. It must be you. You must have done something, because they wouldn't know. You must have said something or done something to be able to.
I'm hearing that you're feeling afraid of school, you're feeling afraid at home. I'm not hearing that there's any safe place for you to be at this time of your life. And it sounds incredibly stressful and can affect your development, I would imagine.
Yeah, it certainly did. It had an impact on my education. And it's probably one of the reasons why much later in life I went and did a doctorate, because it was to prove a lot to myself, not to anybody else, but to actually prove myself that I could continue my education. But it really stunted my educational growth, because I certainly was not engaged in anything other than self-protection. So I learned how to be and how to protect myself from other people. And so the best way to do that was to be very withdrawn, and to be, and that kept me very shy. And actually now I'm certainly not a shy person, but as a child I was, and it forced me underground and to withdraw from other people and to be very alone. And I never thought that it would ever change. I thought I just need to accept it, because this is what God and Jesus does, want you to be different and to follow him. So it drew me closer into the church, because that was the one place I felt somewhat accepted in. So that is where I then ended up being sucked into even more than just being on the edge of it. I then became very fundamentalistic myself. And again, about 16, 17, I was doing the whole evangelical thing of, worship and speaking in tongues. I probably can still talk that nonsense that I learned back then. That tells you something. So I got into it because that was my only place that I felt somewhat safe, oddly, and accepted, because then I was doing everything that those other people were doing as well. And people would come and say things to me like, you really are very anointed. By whom? And that, so I had this sort of, maybe I had this outward impression that people thought that I was a little bit special. Yeah, I was. But yeah, and so it encouraged me even more, because that was then the area that I was I felt most comfortable in.
So you really identified, it sounds like, with the suffering and possibly even the martyr type of feeling that the church can bring sometimes to folks, or religion can bring sometimes to folks, that you were living a Christ-like life because of your suffering.
Yeah.
Also the thing that God doesn't give you anything that you can't handle, and when he gives you, makes you stronger. It's a test.
Yes. And he would never do anything to kill you, but he would take you right to the edge of it. And I lived in that time right on that edge. And felt, and there was no self-acceptance, because I was far too, I had no confidence as a person. I didn't know how to do that.
So heard you. Did you have any friends at the time that you could confide in, or even talk, questioningly about this subject?
I didn't. I just, it was such a non-subject. And then I was just about to leave school, and the AIDS epidemic broke. And I remember watching TV, and this thing around AIDS came up. And of course, you can imagine, right? Here it goes. Around me, my family are saying, my parents are saying, oh, you see, that's God's punishment. And so, yeah, I had no chance for that moment to go, well, yeah, but, you know, but maybe I could be safe, because I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know any of that. I'd never actually had any sexual encounter with another male. So, you know, not at 16. And so that became really hard to kind of understand who I was, what I was, and I didn't know that I needed to even accept myself, because that isn't what I was taught. Because I was taught that, you know, that's selfish and that's sinful anyway. You've got to accept God. It's all about God. It's all about Jesus, and therefore, I was concentrating on that rather than really thinking about who I was and the growth as a person. So it stunted then my own development and my own growth. And leaving school, going to university, my parents made sure that I went to university but stayed at home, so that I couldn't be in a college environment away from home, and therefore be influenced by other people. So, and they were very, very, what's the right word? Smothering of me. So, and that didn't help with that relationship. And
it sounds like intentional or directed isolation.
Oh, completely. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I never ever, and I mean, none of my friends, if I had friends, I mean, if they were boys, they certainly wouldn't be ever the kinds of people who would wear Calvin Klein, for goodness sake, because that was the root of all evil and sin. And we were getting close, though, to actually going into institutional conversion therapy. It just wasn't very, it wasn't heard of in Africa at that time. And at that time, because it was something very big here for you in the US. That wasn't something that's sort of going into on-site therapy, which some people do. It wasn't common in the US, in Africa. And so, but I think had it been there, that's actually probably where they would have put me eventually after I left school, so that I could be with other people and have daily care about who I was, and to make sure that I did not stray at all, because, you know, my life, you know, going to heaven was everything. My family, that's all they ever talked about. It was anything that prevented you from going to heaven had to be cut out and had to be removed, because you know, we couldn't not be together in the afterlife. I didn't want to be with them in real life, while I also worried about spending eternity with them. They were cruel, they were nasty, they were vile, and yeah. But that's how that was what I was thinking, and so I think there was a lot of naivety to me, and probably not until much later, I probably was quite childlike, because of that development just wasn't there, because I was so protected. I was being protected from my natural self, because that was not acceptable to God, and it certainly wouldn't get me into heaven.
How long did this last for you? I mean, we're hearing 10-year-old, you started Pray the Gay Away, 16-year-old electroshock therapy. Now you're in college, and you're being isolated from the rest of your classmates and the other college members. How long did this go on for you?
So it went on till, well, and so here's the thing, right? When we talk about banning conversion therapy, there's a lot of thought out there that it should just be for children, because adults can make up their own mind. Now, that's not true, because when you're an adult and you've been grown up in this environment, your mind is already being made up, but it's been made up as your mind has been built on shit and nonsense, and therefore you don't have the ability just to sit there and go, oh, I'll make this decision right now. I'm going to go do that. I'm not going to do this. It's not as straightforward. It's hugely complex because of the environment that most of us find. There's a lot of us, I think, who find ourselves in this position as gay men and women, and that then we need to then, you know, coming out of that is so much more difficult. At the same time, I'm now 18, 19, 20, and the AIDS epidemic is now out of control. And I'm living in Africa, where really AIDS did become a huge issue. It still is today. And it was a lot around us. So now I'm frightened about that as well. And so I thought, you know what, I just need to probably just get married and have a normal life. And so I met a girl, and we got married. I was 25. And I was trying really hard to now be straight. And we were married for just over a year, and my mother died, and she was 49 years old. And it changed everything in my mind for me, because suddenly I realized, I'd only about a year before I'd realized, you know, that lady that my mother was seeing, oh, that lady over there used to make me call auntie. Well, that auntie wasn't an auntie then. So things started, when I look back and I started then to evaluate, how did I get here? I realized it was all based on a lie, and that I couldn't live with. And at the same time, I met somebody, and David was a Anglican priest. He was married with children, and we started an affair. And it was the first time really that I'd had proper sex with a man. And I also realized that that a man could love me and I could love a man, because I'd also been taught this thing that it was only lust and sex, and therefore there wasn't anything to it, because you were never going to be happy. That gay was misleading, because gay meant happy, and happy no gay man ever was, and no gay woman ever was, because we know that that's so untrue. But that was the thinking at the time. And then when I realized that I could actually be loved by another man, we had this wonderful affair. And I learned so much from David. And I was now getting to that point where I was thinking, well, actually, you know what, I'm going to have to make a choice. And I didn't need to make that. Well, I did make a choice, but I didn't need to open the choice, because my wife one day said to me, "Are you gay?" And the whole world stopped. It just stopped. My whole world stopped. Time stopped. The earth stopped spinning. And in those, I had seconds to either say, yes, I am, and it would change my whole life. And if I said no, I knew that it would change my life. And I made, in that moment, I made the best decision I ever did. Out of my mouth came yes. And we then decided that actually the marriage would need to stop, and I would need to go away. Now, she didn't say, are you having a relationship with David? Because actually she didn't realize that. And David then said to me, well, I'm going to leave my wife and we can be together. No, that never works, and it never happens, does it? So David did leave his wife, but he didn't come to me. And so I'm now devastated. My whole life has been turned upside down. These people that we were in the church with, my wife and I, I've never seen them since. I don't know if you even met them, because I haven't met them. So they must be out there somewhere, but they would never have a relationship with me. And so it was really difficult then to kind of put my life together. And I made a very bold decision that, in fact, not only am I now going to change my whole life, I'm going to come out, I'm going to get on a plane and go back to London, and I'm going to go live back in the United Kingdom. So in 1995, that's exactly what I did. I got on a plane with one bag, a little bit of money, and came to London. And then after landing, I actually had a friend that I went to university college with, and she lived in Brighton. And I went to Brighton not knowing what Brighton was. It's a seaside town, as Nikki will know, and it is gay. It is just from one end to the other end. It is gay. And it was the best thing for me. It was the best thing I ever did. And so I jumped right out. of the closet, shut it, locked it, burnt it down, and started to live as an openly gay man from there.
This but I love that story. It has this nice happy ending, you know, for the most part, where you're at in the story right now. I would imagine, though, with what you had been through for, I don't know, 25 years or so before then, that you didn't leave that unscathed. That and you know, please correct me if I'm wrong, but were there some issues that you struggled with in your head going on? Did you happen to have any form of PTSD from this type of conversion therapy that you went through?
Yeah, I certainly did. Oh, fuck it. It was not that. I make it sound like this is wonderful. There was a wonderful moment, by the way. There was when I got off at Heathrow Airport and I saw the light. It was beautiful. It was just. There was something wonderful about being free and actually being able to be, and there was no preconceived ideas. However, I did not fit into gay society that easily because I didn't have any of that. I didn't know who these people were. And I wasn't somebody who drank a lot, and the Brighton scene is very much around a good pint in a pub, and I'd never really been to a pub, and so I had to learn this whole, and I didn't know the terminology, I didn't know, and so what I was really scared about going from one cult into another cult, and my brain couldn't quite cope with that. I did kind of initially see it as quite cultish, where there's a whole new language of the 90s. Brighton gay was, you know, hello girlfriend, hello, just the language you used. It was so different to me, what I'd ever used before. And so it took me quite a long time to unwind from this sort of religious background into a gay background, and to make that transition. And I met some lovely gay people at American Express, where I got a job quite quickly after landing there. And somebody said to me, I was just chatting, and I think I told them a bit about my background, and they went, "Oh, you don't want to tell people about that." Because the UK has had a slightly different view over the same period. And so I didn't have lots of, I couldn't go to a support group down the road because they didn't actually exist. Evangelical Christianity didn't take hold here in the UK for another good 5-10 years, maybe. It was slightly behind. And so, there wasn't anything there for me. So I just had to learn, all right, now, I remember I told you earlier that I learned to lie well. Well, it came out again then, because I just never told people I'd been married.
Yeah.
It never came, because if people just would look at me like, "But you're a gay man. How did that work?" They didn't understand that, that existed.
And this was the 90s in the UK, and if I recall correctly, it was illegal to be gay in the UK at that time. Like, that wasn't something that came off the books until the 21st century. Is that right?
No, I think so. It's probably the other way around. In South Africa, it was, I think, 2001 or 1997. I think, okay, when being gay was then legal. I think in the UK, Nick, you probably wouldn't know as well, but I think it was, I'm going to say 1964.
Okay, got it.
So
you don't mean gay marriage. You mean just being gay.
Being
was
gay.
Illegal.
Yeah.
So if something's illegal, that means there's a legal punishment for it. What was the legal punishment?
In South Africa.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh no, the legal punishment was being locked away. And the police would do a lot of raiding and
so would there be a trial?
Oh yes, yeah. I had somebody I later got to know. They had been on trial, and they had been locked away, and that was incredibly cruel and awful, but they were entrapped. They were actually, somebody approached them in a park and then took them to their home, and then
they did a sting. They did a sting.
Yeah, and so they did a sting. So that was kind of a common thing. I know it was common here in the UK, but that was much earlier in the UK. I think by the time I got here, being gay was free and easy, and people who were my own age hadn't really lived through anything. You know, being religious in England is not a, you know, not a big thing. So and so yeah, going through that conversion through therapy, and especially being married, was so different to everybody else. So yeah, I was told, you know, don't tell people about it, they won't understand. Rather just leave it. Don't talk about it. Just learn how to be a gay. And so I had to be kind of educated again about being homosexual. And so yeah, there were times, probably didn't last much before 6 years after, maybe to the early 2000s. There were times that I'd wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh shit, I'm going to go to hell. What am I going to do? And so,
wow.
So that did happen. I did actually have that kind of trauma where I would suddenly think, oh, have I made the right choice? Oh, God. And, you know, you joke about, oh, you know, don't go to church, God will strike you. I did have that feeling. I went to a wedding and I had to go into a church, and I did look around when I went in. Who's here? Are you here? It's me. Yeah, it took me a while, and certainly language. So certain words, they still trigger me now. Yeah, bless, I find really, really hard. Oh, and please don't say, oh, I'll pray for you. I'd rather you didn't.
So Mark, what? So yeah, I was going to ask at this point, like, do you believe in a God, or are you not sure at this point? Would you call yourself agnostic? Do you still worry about the hell question?
So I would say that I'm agnostic. I don't believe that a God could be so cruel. And you know, me being slightly abused as a child and as a young adult, it pales in significance when you see the world as today, and what's going in Ukraine. And I don't believe there can be a God, or certainly not a God in the sense that Christians and Christianity would like us to have and believe in, when there could be such absolute cruelty that supposedly if he can part the waves, then he can stop the shit. So yeah, I certainly have that, and that helps actually. I think that helps with some of the PTSD. I certainly don't have that fear of hell anymore.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, if anything, it would be hell. Let me. I like what's going on. So yeah, I think that there was this thing about, you know, that, and especially, you know, when I was really much younger, and I was, you know, I had this thing about, you know, that Jesus can see you everywhere. And you're having anal sex, and you think, really, the other way? Can you just look the other way? You don't need to be. You know, I didn't want an audience. I didn't ask you for an audience. So yeah, I think that there is something about that eventually you can shrug a lot of it off. But I think it's a concerted effort you have to make to say, actually, you know what, just enough of this. Enough. I'm not going to be terrified for the rest of my life. I'm not going to be, you know, you need to move on, and you need to kind of that awful thing, get on with it. But you do need to move on from it and acknowledge and accept that you may suffer from PTSD. I mean, I do it, and most of it is now for language. And I have a problematic relationship with some of my family members, including my sister. And it's based largely on the how they interpret their Christianity. and say, well, you know, my sister still has that lovely phrase, you know, love the sinner and hate the sin. Yeah, and it's just bullshit, really. And she didn't like when I called her out last year on some of her bullshit. In her own relationship, she didn't like it. So she hasn't spoken to me since, and I'm not losing any sleep over it. And I think that's the thing, is just acknowledging that sometimes people can inadvertently be abusive who come from the history of it.
Right.
And they, you know, they need to, you know, I just need to move on. And
now, Mark, we're getting on the topic of PTSD. I'm kind of imagining that folks who may have gone through this, or folks who experience PTSD, they may not, some of them may not even know that they have it. How were you able to kind of first identify that you were struggling with PTSD yourself?
Oh, it was only until 5 years ago. I hadn't identified it for myself until about 5 years ago, when somebody said to me, you reacted odd there. What's that?
Oh.
But you reacted in a way that I wasn't expecting you to. Yeah. And that made me think, that made me sit back and go, you know what, I think I need to use Mr. Google and find out a little bit about, you know, is there such a thing as religious PTSD? Is there a bit of religious trauma? Does it actually exist? And then, wow, Mr. Google just filled my whole life, because there was so much to read and so many stories, and YouTube is full of people talking about it. And that opened my eyes to, my goodness, I do. And so I think the first step was accepting and acknowledging that I do. And then just trying to find ways of working with the triggers, so that not every encounter with these blessed words are going to tip me over the edge. You know, that my head's not going to spin off if I see somebody taking Holy Communion.
Let's back up a little bit. When you are, you know, that it's, I hear that you were able to kind of first identify it when you were like, when someone pointed it out and you looked introspectively. It may help some other folks out there to kind of identify or seek out some help. Well, if they understood what you were experiencing as you were kind of going through this, what emotion would come up, what thoughts would come up, or you know, what was your experience when you were triggered, if you don't mind sharing that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that so I think there are multiple. One of them was definitely around, if I was having a conversation with a family member who is very fundamentalist, they would want to talk in a certain way, in a certain language, and I would try to break through that. And so I found that I could be really argumentative about Christianity. That I didn't, you know, my reaction wasn't, oh, that's nice for you, I'm so glad. Sweet. But actually was much more aggressive, and I could actually become quite shouty and very aggressive. And and that's what somebody else witnessed and said, what happened there? But I realized I did it all the time. I did it all the time. If that button was pressed, it got a reaction, it got a rise. I remember before my husband now, when we were talking about getting married, that I remember having a conversation with my sister, and it was quite aggressive. It was me saying to her that if you do not accept it, I do not want you, do not welcome at my wedding. So it was quite, I really, that was the thing that I just didn't realize that I was doing in such a way that was not helping the relationships that I had either. That automatically, that, you know, shall we pray? Shall we say grace? Shall we pray over our meal? And instead of just going, yeah, whatever, you know, that would get a rise out of me by saying, yeah. So I think those are some of the things that can really happen, is that they can have a that the reaction you have to either words or people's actions that remind you, that trigger that that come from that trauma, that certainly can make you act in a way you wouldn't normally act, and also over a prolonged time. So I'll never, I once had an argument with my sister that went on all day. I made it carry on all day. I wouldn't let it go. She thought that the argument was finished. No, I'm not finished with you yet. And those are things that can happen. Not everybody is, I'm sure that most people are not that aggressive with it. But even things that make you, if you're not argumentative, then you go the other way. And people start to use it, you become incredibly quiet and withdrawn from it. That also can be a form of the outward showing of PTSD. Or you don't want to go to somewhere, or you don't want to be with certain people, or actually it's a huge effort being in some people's company, or going to a certain place. For me, churches are fine, because none of my experience happened in a traditional church with a steeple. Those are fine. Mine happened in that looked like a hall, that weren't traditional places of worship. And so, if somebody said to me, "Oh, we're going to go to somewhere they're going to swing their hands in the air," I think I wouldn't be able to breathe in that environment. It would be too much for me. I couldn't go to that kind of service. It would be so uncomfortable and quite awful. And so again, sometimes it's just the feeling, that pit in the stomach as well. If you're starting to identify that you have a number of reactions, physical reactions as well, then I would encourage people to consider if they are suffering with PTSD and actually get some help, which is what I ended up doing.
What are some of the ways you've managed to kind of cope with or deal with, or dare I say even eliminate some of these PTSD symptoms?
Yeah, humor. I use humor. I make fun of it. And I find that really helps, actually. It diffuses for me the situation. So, I can come out with some stuff that, it's not cutting, but it's just, takes the edge off, and therefore can stop something from being a nasty situation. And making some friends with some priests help sometimes as well, because, and not always, I think for me, I tried then not to always hide away from some of the language as well.
That's interesting. So friends with what denomination priests? Catholic? Church of England? Church of England?
No, I think more sort of Church of England type.
Church of England.
Yeah.
And what's that? Are they accepting?
I think they're very well. One is gay himself, so he is very accepting. And the other one is also very accepting. I think there's a much more relaxed feeling now, especially here in the UK, around some of the churches. Some not. But yeah, there is. I think that it's helped with having women in church positions as well. Actually, it starts to break down the that sort of very misogynistic belief. Although I've always wondered about men who like to wear doesn't tell you about.
There's a science fiction series called Travelers, where people come from the future and inhabit the bodies of people who are going to die, and from many hundreds of years. And one of the scenes involves a Catholic priest doing an exorcism. And one of these travelers walks by and says, "Go get a real job where you don't have to wear a dress." to the Catholic priest.
Mark, do you have any other kind of like there are people who are struggling with this now, or going through this now. What would you say to those folks to kind of encourage them, or give them some hope, give them a light at the end of the tunnel? How would you be able to speak to those folks?
I think there's something about truly wanting to accept yourself and discovering who you are. And in order to do some of that, you need to take yourself out the situation, because sometimes who you around and where you are and physically where you are. Now, you don't have to do what I did, and I got on a plane and traveled thousands of miles to get away from it, and to start all over. But I think that, I would encourage people, don't hang about the lion's jaws, that you could be sucked back in easy, because they have a way of being able to suck you in quite quickly. They want to do that as quickly as possible. So the further you get away from it, the more that, because fundamentalist Christianity doesn't like it, but don't hang about it too much. Don't try to preempt. So I think for me, I got away from it. I kind of did that run, and then I evaluated afterwards what my belief structure was, what I needed in my life. I'm joined a few Facebook groups for ex-gay people, and some of those people still really suffer with this concept of wanting to be loved by God and not knowing where you stand, and that can go on for some people. That can go on for a very long time. That can go on for years. For me, it was easier just to move away from it, be as far as I could from it, until I got to the stage where actually I felt comfortable with that.
Got it. Mark, thank you so much for spending some time with us this evening and sharing your story. I felt pain and I felt hurt from what you went through, but in some sense, I also feel a little bit of a hope now that we're kind of sharing this, from you sharing this, the bravery that you have sharing this for other folks who work through some of their issues, and hopefully to end this. I don't see this as being beneficial from from the research that's been done, the people I've talked to, but is this still going on today? These kind of conversion therapies, both in the UK and I know it's happening here in the US.
Yeah, I think it's everywhere in the world still. I think some countries have done, a great job about banning. Canada, New Zealand has. I think Australia are in that concept. Here in the UK, it's been considered, but actually it's been considered only for children, because the belief is that as an adult you can make a choice, and that's why I said at the beginning, it's not that straightforward. Unfortunately, I cannot get to the minister in charge, and it's a crying shame, because I actually live in the same town that she's supposed to. I actually live in her constituency, and she does not make herself available for any conversation around it, because she's got it in her head what she thinks, and she's been led a lot by religious groups, because they feel that it's against their freedom of expression, their freedom of religion, and there's multiple groups. Those are not just Christian in themselves, and so that this is, we just got to be really aware that unfortunately there are people around us who are still subject to it, and even if there is law, they may still be caught up in it. As I say, it's really complex as an adult going for conversion therapy, and they should really be banned by now. I think it's great, actually. I think on YouTube they've now got the Trevor Project advert comes up on all people talking about pro conversion therapy. I think the Trevor Project banner comes up now on there, so there's something saying there's a better way. And I think that should be, a bit. It should come with a health warning. I mean, it is. Yeah, but unfortunately in the UK we don't have a minister who, mind you, an opposing minister doesn't believe in it either. So it's not like it's just not understood enough, which is terribly sad.
Yeah, in the US, I don't see, because of constitutional law, that they could ever make a federal law. It probably would have to be a state-to-state thing.
Yeah.
Especially because of quote-unquote religious freedom. I don't, that would be a tough nut to crack, even if you could pass a federal. I mean, look what's happening in Texas,
Yes.
for abortion.
Mark, if you are in the UK listening to this, what do you feel that people can do to work to get conversion therapy banned, not only for adults, but for children too?
I think definitely write to government. I think that also support those that are, because there are some charities here in the UK, support those charities. And I think it's also about talking about it. Often that's just in itself is really helpful, by talking about the fact that conversion therapy is a wickedness to people who don't know about it. And you'll find that I have found a lot of other people go, oh God, I never realized that. And by what you told me, yeah, and then they start talking to people. So eventually, it becomes something that is not hidden away. And it's not something that lives in its own closet. Because as I say, there is this fear that those of us who've been through what we have been, and especially those of us who they married to women, or in the case of a lot of lesbians who marry to men, that actually we don't tell our story enough, because we don't think that the LGBTQ community would necessarily understand us. So we try to keep it quiet, but actually the time has come for us now to start to be much more vocal about it, so that, I think that's in any country really, is so that those who don't know about it hear about it, and it becomes something that is discussed.
It feels like this whole culture of keeping things in the closet and it really only benefits the oppressor, really only benefits the abuser. Yeah. And obviously it may not be safe for those who have been victims to come out of the closet, but the only people who are benefiting from it are the people who are doing the abusing. And that,
absolutely. And closets were only ever invented for clothes, right?
I attended a conference back in 2017, and one of the speakers talked about the subject, and it was from the point of view of America. And as I recall, he gave actual case studies of organizations in the United States which did conversion therapy. And in the ones he pointed out, each time the people running it eventually came out as gay, that they were closeted.
Yes. Yes, I like the fact that when those happen, they kind of hit international news.
Yep.
So we can all year in it and enjoy the story. Yeah. I mean, one of the groups I'm attending, they're all full of ex-gay. So they all proclaim themselves as ex-gay, and they preached ex-gay, and they were part of a whole ex-gay movement. And most of those now are past that, and have formed this group, and actually partook in the creation of the Netflix movie called Pray Away, that I didn't watch immediately. I did have to take a deep breath and play on and watch that. It was very, very.
Is that still available?
It is still available, yeah, and I encourage people to watch that. Simply because it will give an insight into the life of some of those people. So
several people in the chat earlier, when you were talking about the electroshock treatments in your mouth, were saying this can't be going on today. How long ago was that? Do you know anything about whether or not those techniques are still in use?
Yeah, I mean, those techniques are still definitely in use. And I know that they're in use in the US. I've heard about them. They normally are electrodes that are attached to one's genitals.
Oh.
I say that actually.
I didn't like the mouth idea, but I'll take the mouth for them.
And you, yeah.
Choose mouth over nuts.
Yeah. If you could ask me which.
Yes. So I think that it definitely happens to this day. These sound like they belong to a Charles Dickens novel, but actually no.
People were saying medieval Europe. It sounded like it was from the Inquisition time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when that was happening to me, that was I was 16, so we are heading to the 1980s. But even to this day, yeah, these are things that happen.
Well, we have a few questions for you here. And folks, if you have some questions, please drop them into the chat, both here and over on Discord too. We're monitoring both of those places. You had mentioned an estranged sister. Did she know what you were going through at the time with the conversion therapy? Did she know about these electroshock treatments?
Yeah, so she didn't. And she kind of questioned me on those last year. And that's, I think, largely because there's 6 years between us. So she really was a child. She was a little thing when I was going through most of the prayer way. She only really discovered that so she was 19 when my mother died. So she was actually really quite young. And she didn't realize anything about my mother, herself. So when I think one of my aunts told her a couple of years after that her mother was fundamentally, she was lesbian, she suddenly went, oh, it makes sense of some of the stuff I witnessed and saw. Oh, I understand now. I didn't understand it as a child, but now I do. So I think she became more understanding. However, she's still very much in the mold of evangelical Christianity, and so caught up in that whole life. And she just can't get out of that. She still has this belief that the Bible is true. It's the word of God. It's uttered from God. Hello. And then it's not scientifically proved. No, science is wrong. So it makes some of that discussion with her quite difficult. And that's why, for now, I concentrate on other relationships, shall I say.
I always have to ask people like that. How did the koalas crawl all the way to Australia with no food?
Yes, exactly.
When the ark landed. So yeah, another question from the chat from much earlier. You were talking about when you were married. Was there ever a time you thought you were straight after you started the question that you weren't? Maybe like during your year of marriage, did you convince yourself you were, or were you trying to convince yourself you were?
I think it was more convincing. I don't think there was ever a time in my life I thought I was straight. I always played straight. So that I don't know how. I'm not. But yeah, I played straight in order to be accepted by the other people in the church and also God. And that was important to me. Although, yeah, I don't know how, because especially when I was having the relationship with David, that was most certainly, I did not think I was straight. I knew then I really was gay, but I had to go deep in myself to have a straight relationship.
Got it.
But I wouldn't say that I was bisexual either. So
I was just going to ask you that. Like, how would you differentiate that?
Yeah, I wouldn't. No, I've never been. I've never been bisexual. No, I've always been gay. It's just that I learned how to play straight. I think that would be the best way to explain it.
Mark, thank you so much again for coming on here and sharing your story, and hopefully helping out some of the people who may be struggling with exactly what you've been through. Really, I really appreciate, and your story touches me deep in my heart. Do you have any kind of final thoughts or final words that you want to leave us with before we kind of wrap up the show?
I think that the only one is that when, that is talking about conversion therapy to other people. And I think the best way to, the best way that we can get this banned is when straight people talk about conversion therapy as being wrong. And straight people saying, well, why would you want to do that? Why? It's and to be vocal about accepting how we accept everybody and how we do that, and that breaks the mold. I was, and that being gay is not the kind of thing that we need to be fearful of. I've spent the weekend actually working with Ukrainian refugees who need homes in the UK, and one of the things that has been wonderful to see is that the Ukrainian gay community and LGBT community Because there we have, we've got to find homes and places for trans people to live in order to give them an opportunity, because they obviously, we needed, there's some of those need to move out of Ukraine with Russians coming closer, because it's going to be an awful situation for them. And so the amount of people here in the UK were open to that. It didn't matter to them that a lesbian couple, they needed housing. They were people who needed housing. And so that is reassuring to see. But I think more people that should talk about it rather than keep quiet. I think that will be the tipping edge, and really get conversion therapy highlighted and then banned.
So you feel like this is going to come down more on the side of public opinion and less on the side of, hey, this just doesn't fucking work?
I think both. I think public opinion that it fucking doesn't work. I think if we look at things, where in the countries that I've lived in now, public opinion about should same-sex attracted people get married, and the answer is yes. It's predominantly yes. I think that if we then, it now needs to move on. We have lots more to do around LGBT, and we need a lot more around trans, and we need lots more around conversion therapy as well, because I think that it hurts. And I've talked mostly about being a gay man, so this is coming from my perspective, but of course there's a whole other story around trans as well, and how some of this is also can damage even more so in some cases. But yeah, it's an awful fucking thing that needs to be squashed and got rid of.
Like people were saying, it sounds medieval.
It sounds medieval, but the problem is that, yeah, there are an awful lot of churches out there who preach it, who feel that it's necessary because it saves your soul.
Mark, thank you so much once again. Really, really appreciate it. Beautiful talk, and I'm glad to know your story. I'm better because of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, folks, that's going to wrap up the discussion part, and we're going to hear from our founder and president, Dr. Ray, in the moment with some of his closing thoughts. But first, you're probably wondering, are you guys done with this? Is there any more RfRxs in the future?
We hit 100. Is there any more, or is this it?
I know, folks, that was our goal. We're going to hit 100, and we're not going to be back. So it was nice. Just kidding. We have to celebrate our 2-year mark next Monday. And next Monday, we're going to have another RfRx Religion Spotlight. And this one specifically is on Tibetan Buddhism. Talia Newland will be joining us to talk about what Tibetan Buddhism is, its practices, beliefs, leadership, and all of that may be kind of foreign and exotic to us Western minds, kind of making it fairly tempting to join. We'll learn about some history and the struggles that adherents experiences within and trying to transition out of their religion. I'm excited for that one. I've been looking forward to this for quite a while. Rob, what's next?
Yeah, that's fantastic. So most previous RfRx recordings can be found on a YouTube channel. We're just a few weeks behind. We have 93 or so there right now. And I think Eric is going to put the link in the chat again.
Yep.
Any questions, comments, inquiries about today's event or anything else can also be emailed to us, and we'll give you that email address. And let me mention, I think it was mentioned before, but it's worth mentioning again. We have a blog at medium.com/excommunications. It's fantastic stories written by a whole bunch of interesting people about a whole bunch of interesting topics. And lastly, let me say that we have a podcast. It's been around for a very long time. The older episodes are definitely worth catching. They're a group of hosts talking about different topics. And all of the recent ones are the audio versions of these RfRx sessions. So you can listen to it while you're driving without having to worry about watching something.
If you are watching this while you're driving, keep your eyes on the road. And folks, we are all over the social medias. If you can't necessarily donate or volunteer, or even if you can, another way that really helps us out here at Recovering from Religion, another way to really kind of boost the signal, as people would say in Firefly, because I love that show, is by liking, interacting.
Yeah, can't stop the signal.
Can't stop the signal. All right. Is liking, sharing, engaging with our social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and even on TikTok. And we got a newsletter too, right, Rob?
Yes, absolutely. You can sign up for it. We'll put the link in there. It provides news about our organization, recent resources that we've added, recently published RfRx videos and other videos, and also recently published blog posts. Don't miss it.
Yeah. All right. Well, now is the time where I not only want to hear from you, but I also want to hear from Dr. Del Rey, our founder and president. I'm going to launch a feedback poll. This feedback poll really kind of helps us create the programming and direct us in how we're doing. So feel free to answer that. And while that poll is running, I'm going to bring on the one, the only Dr. Del Rey. Daryl, how are you doing today?
Good, and good to see you again. Where have I seen you recently?
you came and crashed in my house, man. Just knocked on my door, and what choice did I have?
I'm here to tell you that Eric Wells has got the most ginormous dog I've ever seen. You put a saddle on him, you could ride around Colorado Springs. It would scare the hell out of a whole lot of children. Yeah, Grizz is well named. And Grizz is the friendliest dog in the West, I think. Anyway, we had a good time visiting with Eric. So, hey, Mark, thank you for the courage to do this talk tonight. I have heard hundreds of stories over my career with RFR, of course, and you had nuances in there that I've never heard. I've never heard anybody put it together like you did tonight. So I think people who will come back and listen to this, who may not have been on here right now listening, are going to benefit. Hundreds of people will probably be able to do that. So I appreciate the courage you took, because you also have another life, and telling your story is risky. I know it's risky in my life as well. But and one thing I really heard over and over again was the double bind that religion puts especially gay kids into. You know, there's no safe place. Your parents, you're not safe at home, and you're not safe at school. You get bullied one place and you can't talk about it at home. That vicious cycle has just got to impact somebody's neurological development that eventually leads to trauma. And we're only now starting to label that trauma as religious trauma, but it is rooted in religion. And over again, we see people exhibiting traumatic behaviors. And I really like the way you described how it affected you, how it manifested in you, because those responses to the environment that are over the top, that are stronger than a person would expect, are probably signs that something else is going on there, and you spotted it in yourself, and you went and got some help. I want to say this to everybody who's listening tonight, or anybody who listens to this: pay attention to how you respond to your environment, and pay attention to the feedback you get from the people in your environment, because they're going to tell you, or you may see it yourself, how you're responding to your environment, and it's causing you more distress. And if you ask the question, I wonder why I'm the only one distressed in this environment, in this situation. And the answer may be, and I'm not saying it always is, but maybe because it's your own trauma responding to the environment. And it's a legitimate reason to respond. I mean, if you're responding in a scared way to an environment when you're 10 years old because it's unsafe, that's a pretty normal thing. But if you continue that behavior into adulthood, it can hurt you and perpetuate the trauma. So anyway, long story, but you nailed it, Mark, in so many ways today. And also, I agreed with what you said about it's time. And I'm not gay, so I'm not speaking from personal experience. I'm saying I've got lots of friends that were married, lots of gay friends that were once married to opposite sex, men and women, doesn't matter, and trans people. And I think the more we talk about it and normalize it, the more we realize religion drove you into that relationship, forced you into it. In some ways, you couldn't feel good about yourself within the religion unless you had a hetero relationship. And that's just horrible in so many ways, because religion just doesn't let us be who we are. So anyway, as you can tell, your talk triggered a whole lot of thoughts on my side. So folks, if you appreciated what you've seen here tonight and the many great speakers that we have and people like Mark that come on here and tell just honest, deeply felt stories and that help all of us, then I hope you will consider supporting what we do here at Recover from Religion. Obviously, you can donate. We appreciate anybody, even if it's just a small amount of money every month. Monthly donations help us a lot. But if you can, and if you can, maybe you can volunteer. We've always got needs for volunteers and in Helpline, on the support groups, on the IT area. We can always use support in a whole lot of different areas as volunteers. If you can't do any of those things, at least you can repost our social media. You can make a comment when this video goes up. You can say this, how did this video help you? So anyway, thanks so much, Mark. I really appreciate this. And Eric, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. Rob, thank you so much for co-hosting with me. Nikki, you're amazing. Thank you for streaming this into the Atheist Community Discord. Glenda, you're one hell of a troll smasher. I know that you had your work cut out for you.